Hi, this is Siofra's Magic Alcove, and I'm Siofra Bradigan. So, finally, I get to make another video. And I've been thinking about what I wanted to do the subject on, and I had a couple of ideas, so we'll launch into one of them that I had. I was thinking about gaslighting and how, especially when you're first starting out and you're uncertain of the total veracity of the experiences that you might be having when you're not used to them, that it is not uncommon and certainly not unexpected that people will not believe you and try and undermine your experience with their doubt and their questions and that kind of thing. And I think that's actually one of the reasons for keeping silent is, the one that's not about protecting the information, but it's more about protecting um, the experience for yourself and to get grounded and centered in that new reality that you're having. So recently, I shared my experience of being ridden by Oya at a Bembe with someone on Facebook who I think is one of our subscribers. So if you see this, this is not aimed directly at you, but it certainly got the ball rolling. And the experience that I had was pretty intense. For those of you who haven't heard about it, I went to a temple in Oakland. I was invited to go, and Bembe this was Santeria based, although there were other practitioners there. Apparently the husband and the wife were in two different branches. One was in the Santeria version, the other was, the husband I think was more in one of the African versions of the religion. And the way this Bembe was set up was that it they brought in like 10 different orishas, gods and goddesses, and the men played the music and the drums and so forth for each orisha, each one of them having their own beat. And then if someone was ridden, which is their way of saying taken over by a spirit and inhabited by them, or, being a medium in an extreme sense, then they know who took over the body based upon what orisha they were chanting, singing, drumming to. And I was a little bit anxious about going to it in the first place because I figured if anyone who wasn't a member of their religion was likely to have an experience, it would be me, with my years of channeling and past life memories and all the other things I'd had already up to that point. And I was instructed in how to dress and so forth and how to act, and I was dancing. And partway through one of the sections, I started making movements my body can't make, and I started to notice that it was happening. And then I heard people around me talking, saying things like, "I think she's being ridden," and I thought they can't be talking about me. And then I would panic a little bit and come back to myself, and then go back down into the rhythm. And then when the music, the drumming stopped, when they got to the end of that segment, everyone around me apparently knew what was happening and was prepared for the event, and my body dropped like a rock, and they caught me, and then they took me outside, and one of the priests actually came outside and pulled my arm, and rapidly like that, talking to me, trying to get me to tell him my name until I could talk, and I told him my name. And then I stayed outside for the rest of it because I was a little worried if one of them liked me, maybe another one would, so I stayed outside. And then I watched the woman whose birthday party this was, she was the high priestess. I watched her get taken or ridden by her orisha, which was one of the love goddesses. I can't remember the name at the moment. And it was interesting to witness from the outside after especially having experienced it from the inside, because her eyes changed dramatically. Her body would do very uh, incredibly athletic uh, movements and and strength and so forth. That was not usual, and she would sometimes come back up to the surface and then get wild-eyed, and then watched her sink back down and the spirit take over. So afterwards, after it was all over, and I was there for several hours into the evening after the Bembe, and talking to everybody, met a number of people, and I asked them who had ridden me, and they told me it was Oya. So when I shared this piece of information with this individual, he wanted to know if I had been, if I was a crowned priestess, and no. Although I met one when I was there, I met several actually, but I met a brand new one who had been living behind the altar in this temple for a year and had just come out, I think about a week or two before this event, where they had shaved her head and cut her skull open and implanted different herbs and crystals under her skull, or under her skin atop her skull, to dedicate her to her Orisha. And so it was pretty clear that these were extremely serious practitioners. They knew what they were doing. This was a dedicated temple. I had no reason to not believe what they told me. But when I mentioned this, he immediately was suspicious that that can't have been what happened, and consulted with someone else who doesn't know me either or know my circumstances, who agreed that that can't have been what happened. And then they decided what had happened to me was not that, but something different, because if Oya had taken me, I would have died. And I was just sitting there going like, excuse me? All right, this is weird, because I was there, they were professionals, and they knew what they were talking about. I'm going by what they said, and at some point in history, people were ridden before they were crowned, because that would be how they learned how. And so I decided, for myself, at least from my experience, this was an example of gaslighting, making me think that I did not know what had happened to me, and that I was, crazy to think that that's what it was, and I was obviously wrong. And also a combination of mansplaining. Don't know for sure if that was the case, but that was how it felt. And that's what this is about. So I decided that this individual, whether they meant to or not, had gaslit me and made me doubt my own reality and my own experiences. And I actually had to go back through the whole thing in my head and remember what happened, and consider the temple, the people, the experience that they had, and so forth, and what they said. And in the end, it doesn't matter whether this person is right or not. This is what I was told at the time, and I certainly did have a very intense experience that I did not want to repeat. I decided that this religion was not for me after that happened, because living behind someone's altar for a year was a lot more dedication to a specific path than I was interested in making. But it brought the whole subject up in my head, and realizing that it happens a lot. I mean, the people not believing what you're saying is pretty common, and sometimes we are wrong. There's no doubt. I accept it fully. Who knows? Maybe these people are right, but it doesn't change the experience I had. They're just changing the definition of what happened to me, and it's not useful at this point in my life. And the I, any number of times where I've told somebody something has happened, and they've like poo-pooed it, like when I was explaining to one of our students that I had put a geas on my father after he died, making it impossible for him to reincarnate until he was released, so that he had to stay here and listen to all of the things that he had done to us and how much he had affected us. And so those of us who wanted to have that conversation knew that whenever we spoke of him, he was listening and hearing us. Whether he liked it or not was of no interest to me. because he was in denial right up until the end that he had had anything to do with anything at all. And then I added a further geas on it so that when I did release him and he decided to come back into a new life, that he had to choose to be born into a healthy family that did not have abuse of children in it like mine did, but he would have this intense urge to work to help reduce or eliminate child abuse. That would become his entire reason for existing. It's sort of what a geas is. It's like, doesn't matter whether you want to do it or not. It's something that you're compelled to do and you have to do it. So I was telling this to a student, and he says, I don't think anyone can do that. And I'm like, I just told you that I did that. So does that mean I'm lying or I'm crazy in your mind? Because I don't know of a third option here. And that's the thing. It's like, we've talked about magical psychosis in the past, and delusional thinking and magical psychosis is a real thing, and I see it happen on a regular basis. But the keynotes to that are not that you're having unusual experiences so much as your interpretation of those experiences puts you at the center of some story in your head of the universe and elevates your importance in your own mind. We are all the center of our own universe, but then you become the center of all universes in most common delusions. And most of those are like, I'm here to save everybody, I'm going to save the world, and only I can do it, and or I am truly God, or I am Jesus incarnated, or I'm super special, or whatever. It's like, those are all ego delusions. And so once you know what to look for, they're pretty easy to spot. And if someone's in the throes of one of those, there's not too much you can say that's going to like get them out of it, unless you know them extremely well. And sometimes that's sort of it for that life. They just keep on down that path. And I've met a number of people who were like that. One of them that came here and was convinced that Ian, I, and he were the three angels in some mystical story out there that were going to get rid of everything on the planet and then reshape it and reform it and remake it into a wondrous paradise and bring the people back or something like that. That I don't believe. I believe I'm unique in that everyone is unique, and I used to think it was my responsibility to fix the planet because it was my fault that the whole thing was broken, and I no longer believe that. I've gotten out of that particular ego trap, that taking on more responsibility than is warranted. I'm like, we've got almost 8 billion people here now. Some of them have got to be partially responsible for the whatever you want to call it that we happen to be in. But so if you have an incredibly intense experience and you share it with someone who doesn't believe you, it can make you question your own experience and what happened and what it meant to you. So it's not like a straightforward kind of a thing, because we talk about healthy skepticism, and that's important to maintain because you don't want to end up going down that path of delusion and self-absorbed messianic kind of angel from the universe Godhead glow thing. So that's one of the reasons why we talk so much about being grounded and looking for the reality that we happen to be in, instead of trying to fantasize about a reality that we think we can make happen. And on one hand, a lot of those delusions aren't harmful in the sense that they're not pulling other people into it, and you can consider it sort of like a harmless kind of fantasy reality that somebody is creating that is helping them with whatever it is that's going on in their life, so long as they're not trying to pull other people into it and lead them down that path. Because that's like the beginning of all cults. Every cult I've ever read about maybe you've read about some that are different, but anyone I've read about has started off with like an individual who thinks that they're better than, smarter than, more important than, more worthy than, more aware than, more enlightened than everyone around them. And that goes for the intellectual cult like Nexium. It certainly goes for the spiritual cults, whether they're Buddhist based, which there's a number of those, or Christian based, which there's a lot of those. And then in order to get enough energy to fulfill the fantasy reality, the need becomes to draw other people into the story and have them believe it too, which means that independent thinking, questioning, and so forth of the leader, whoever they are, is discouraged, dissuaded, not allowed, and then the person who started this delusional path and has like collected a group of other people who've decided that they're right and are adding their energy to it, at some point the path always falls apart. The reason why there's mass suicides with most of these cults is because at some point the person at the center of it realizes that this house of cards is about ready to fall apart and nothing is going to happen the way they think it is, and then they come up with the reason why dying is the right thing to do. Like with the Heaven's Gate cult, that was a really good example. I mean, how the heck he managed to convince men to have themselves castrated so that they would be pure in body and mind and spirit, so that they would be worthy of having a body that was outside of Earth, that was on a spaceship that was traveling through the comet Hale-Bopp passing Earth. It's like, obviously this kind of stuff doesn't happen all at once. So being on the lookout for the beginning, the small instances of gaslighting where you just suddenly feel like there's something not right, you're feeling off balance, somebody is pulling the rug out from under you, making you think that you don't know what's going on, that you really can't comprehend. And of course, we know that there's not just magical gaslighting. It happens in relationships. Sociopaths love this, making people think that they're crazy. And funnily enough, the term comes from that movie called Gaslight. That's where they coined the term in the first place, which was a husband convincing or attempting to convince his wife that she was not experiencing what she was experiencing and that she was going out of her mind and to kill herself, or I can't remember what his goal was. I think that's what it was. But they did such a good job of portraying it in the movie, and of course they had gas lights. That was the whole thing, and he kept like messing with the lights and making them go dim and then saying there was nothing wrong with them. But it's a common tactic in manipulation of all kinds, whether it's abuse. What was it? Julia Roberts was in one movie, I can't remember the name of it, where her husband was having an affair and she saw him at a restaurant with another woman and kissing her, and he tried to convince her that she couldn't have seen that because that never happened. I thought, yeah, right. Yeah, that's a good example. So we certainly see them, and the examples out there. And if it works so well for ordinary reality, we're talking like saw it with my own two eyes, everyone else in the room could see it with their eyes. It happened in physical reality. It wasn't a ghost or a spirit or anything like that, or an intuition. It was just like a blatant, in-your-face kind of event. And even in that, they can sometimes convince us on some level that we must be crazy. And I'm sure there's a lot of you who have experienced that, because anyone who's been abused, either as a child or an adult, has experienced that particular thing. So I guess the reason for talking about the subject in the video has to do with thinking about how we perceive what other people say to us. Our automatic distrust of anyone else's experience, which I think is normal. I have it. It's like I hear someone tell me something that's seems outlandish. I sit and think about it. and go like, okay, well, nothing like that's ever happened to me, so I don't have like a basis to say that couldn't or could happen. But then again, are there any other signs that this person's mentally unstable? And if there aren't, I have to open myself up to the possibility that maybe something like that did happen. Since reality is subjective anyway, in a sense, what we think happens to us has just as much of an effect as what does happen to us, as far as how we internalize the story and its effect on our psychological and spiritual makeup. So, yeah. Anyway, not sure if there's much else to say on the subject in particular, but finding people that you can trust, that you can tell them what you're going through and ask questions of, or so, if you have a mentor or something like that, is important, I think. And if you don't have anybody, it's a bit of a struggle because it's a little bit more difficult to figure out and understand what's going on. It's one of the reasons why we started this channel. I mean, you know, I try not to get too much into my own ego. My life is what is for me, kind of thing. And I think that we have great potential to be more open-minded and more perceptive about reality and the things that are around us, that there's a lot happening that we often just sort of dismiss or ignore or turn away from, however. And when we're starting to try and open ourselves up, it can be kind of scary for people because you're shifting your perception of reality around. And there's these potential pitfalls. Like, suddenly finding yourself a cult leader. So I think that writing the experiences down when they happen helps, because then you have a record of how you actually felt at the time. Hopefully that's not flashing like it is for me. And that's one of the reasons for keeping a journal. Later you might look at it and think, well, how silly was that? I had no clue what was going on. But it doesn't matter. You still have a record of how you felt about it at the time, which can be useful. If you can have a group experience, then you have some kind of verification in the instant that you have a collective subjective experience, and that can be helpful. Watching out for those thoughts of importance and whatnot. Guess I'll find out if that was just flashing again. Sorry guys. I guess I'll have to put a flashing warning on this video. I think I have everything plugged in. So, that's one of the reasons we talk about communication, learning how to ask questions that generate responses instead of making statements that shut people down. Well, that doesn't sound right. That can't happen. These are not good responses. But, exactly what was going on at the time and when that took place, and how do you know that, or what's the purpose of it? I don't know. I can't think out in imaginary scenarios at the moment. But, you do your best, you try as well as you can, and forgive yourself when you fumble and make mistakes. But if you're in your own power, it's a lot harder for people to do that to you. They can try, or accidentally try, but then you just sit back and think about it and look at it. And, when you've done the shadow work and you're willing to look at yourself and so forth, and evaluate your own experiences as well as you can, being in the subjective reality, then you're less likely to get pulled into any of that stuff. Either the cult-like scenario with the shared delusional states and whatnot, or the need to be important, more important than anybody else, or more important than others, having a specific spiritual goal that you can help to attain and whatnot. It isn't a bad idea to want to attain a spiritual goal or to help the planet or to heal things, but when it becomes that self-focused, the only reason for existing, then it can bring its own hazards. So balance, like we talked about before, is vitally important. Um, so yeah, anyway, I guess I'll stop at this point with this one and see if there's another one I'm going to do right away or not. Um, yeah, we'll see. So, this has been Siofra's Magic Alcove, and I'm Siofra Bradigan. Blessed be.